I'm here today to talk about literature from the Arabic countries. To be more precise, talk about the question how Arabic literature finds its way to readers in Europe and Germany in particular. If you take a look at the programs of German-speaking publishers, you only find very few Arabic titles, and we would like to look into the question why this is the case. For what subjects and titles we could arouse interest among German readers, European readers. What's their interest dependent on? How can we raise the interest? And we also would like to ask the question in the opposite direction. Arabic readers, what subjects are interesting for them and what not? What titles of non-Arabic authors need to be translated into Arabic language? And also ask about the questions about the particular challenges and difficulties of the Arabic book market. I would like to talk with my three guests about that subject. First of all, I have Rasha al Ameer. She's connected from Beirut with us. Welcome very much, Rasha. Rasha is a journalist, a reviewer, and publisher. A few years ago, many years ago, together with her brother, the murdered Lutman Srim, she founded the Al Jadid publishing house, and there is a very fine and small collection of linguistic and intellectual and theological writings that they publish, and also some translations from German of Paul Celan, for example, but also Nietzsche. Jenseits von Gut und Böse was published in Arabic language. We talked with Yasmina Jraissati. Yasmina, I hope that I pronounced your name properly. Please forgive me if that was wrong. She is connected from Dubai. Nice to see you again. She is a literary agent and publishing manager of Storytel Mina, a digital platform for audiobooks and ebooks that expanded to the Arabic countries. And she founded Raya, a literary agency. And with that, some well-known Arabic writers are represented, among others, from the Lebanon, Elias Khouri and Huda Barakat from Syria, some authors, Khaled Talif, Mustafa Khalifa, Dima Vanous, Janawaz Bek, and from Morocco, Youssef Fado, some very well-known Arabic authors. And we'll talk to Piero Salabè. I hope I pronounce your name properly. He's connected from Munich. He's an author, translator, and proofreader at the Hansa Verlag. And he deals with foreign literature from English, French, and Spanish countries, but also from Arabic countries. And the last book of Al-Aswani was published in the Hansa Publishing House. Yasmina, I would like to talk with you first. As you are at home in both worlds, you know the Arabic book market very well, the European book market, the German book market, and for a long time you have observed about the interest of Arabic authors. Do you see any trends? Have you noticed that European and German publishers or readers are interested in very particular titles and subjects in the Arabic world? And what does the interest depend on?
Yes, thank you for this question. So first of all, I'm very happy to be here. So thank you for having me. It's good to see you all again, although with screens in between, hopefully soon in person. So yes, I mean, I've been agenting now for the past 17 years, if I'm not miscounting. I started in 2004, a long time ago. Let's say that in general, there's of course an appetite for, I would say, different stories and what counts as different, let's say, for different various audiences depending on different markets. But it's certainly true that in recent years, starting 2011 with the Arab Springs and the various revolutions, a different kind of interest picked up, which wasn't surprising because we've also had seen this in the past with, for example, the Lebanese civil war. So yes, certainly there seems to be like current affairs will tend to, let's say, guide the interest, but it's it's understandable because suddenly like a country or several countries become headlines in the news, and this raises the interest in people. Like people are curious to know more about these places, where these people come from, etc. So this is where basically, let's say that the spotlight suddenly falls on a given country because of, I would say, political situations. That's one certainly very important trend. It's not the only one, but it's certainly one that we were able to observe in past years.
Können Sie dafür?
Can you give us examples for that? You have just said that the Arabic Spring 2011, and are there any other examples in history with other examples indicating that news created more interest in literature of a certain country?
I can say certainly from recent history to start with, in my own case regarding authors of my own catalog, like let's say even quality being equal, like recently we've seen major interest in authors like Samar Yazbek. In 2011, her book was among the first to come out, a testimony about what was going on inside Syria. And of course, noise had started to, let's say, reach European ears, and so people were curious. And this book really made it very big, as something that's, I think, as big as anything, as bigger than anything in my experience up to that point. And Samar Yazbek is actually today, I'm happy to say, still on the scene. So not just that non-fiction book made it to, let's say, to the Western scene, but now her novel, The Blue Pen, Al-Masha'a in Arabic, is on the long list of the National Book Award in the US. So I'm happy that her fiction also made it, but also for ambiguous reasons. But yes, certainly this has put her in the front line, let's say, of publishing, because she covered in a literary way, but in a narrative nonfiction way, let's say, the events of 2011 in Syria. So that was a very big example. And this book was actually published in Germany. Piero might remember. And I have another author from Syria as well, Khalid Khalifa, whom you mentioned earlier in the introduction. Also, he made it into German in particular and other European languages, and he also really grew. So I can't say it's, of course, just the Syrian crisis that brought these names up, because they are very talented authors and they have other aspects that I can see please or speak to a Western audience. Like they're very strong stories, and this is also what Western audiences would look for. But they happen to also be set in a given time frame.
Wie beobachten Sie das?
How have you observed the sustainability of the news-driven interest? Is there sustainability in it? Like, if
I always tried to promote literature for literature. It's very hard to basically try and separate the two. Of course, when you have interest in an author because he's from Syria, you're not going to shut the door. But it's difficult to navigate because you want to use this as an opportunity to open the door further and invite the editor or the readers that the editors are trying to reach in their own markets, right? Further beyond like the headline. And that's the challenge, really. As an agent, I've started because I wanted to go beyond what I always call exoticism. And somehow news cliché somehow falls into this category, and it's not very fair. And the authors are aware of that. Like Samar Yazbek recently in an interview, for example, said how frustrated she was when she only got political questions when she's here to speak about her novel, and so she feels like the literary value of the book is basically going underestimated or unobserved. So this is certainly frustrating for the authors. So is it sustainable in the long run? I don't think so. I think we need to, as people, not just me, but as any people, like publishers also having, like Arab publishers also deploying efforts, as anyone trying to promote Arabic literature, these current affairs or political events should only be opportunities, but they can't be the only reason why people show interest. And we've seen, for example, a very short-lived interest in the Lebanese literature, for example. Like after the Civil War, there was a rise or an interest, a focus on Lebanese literature, and then suddenly later on, people lost interest. And we don't want this to happen. We want people to discover the literature, not just through the prism of politics. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Herr Salabè.
Mr. Salabè, I would like to pass on what we have just heard from Yasmina and ask you, if you select a book and if you just check whether it fits into your program, what are your considerations? What are your criteria? Hello. I assume that you are talking to me. I haven't heard my name. Hello. Good afternoon. I'm so happy that I can talk about that subject with you, as it has been very important for me, and I've been dealing with that for a long time. What Yasmina said is something that I've known for a long time, and I really appreciate her work. I think I can only underline and support what she said. The daily news and the daily events lead to a growing interest in general terms. You also asked for any other political events. I also would mention the 11th of September, 9/11. That was a time when here in Europe we dealt with a culture that people regarded menacing, threatening, and they wanted to learn more about that culture, or cultures, we should rather say, as the Arabic language region is a very huge one. We talk about one language, Arabic, but we all know that this is not only one country. It has different cultures, religions, etc., and therefore it's maybe too small to only talk about Arabic literature. There are also Arabic-speaking authors that write in English. Maybe we can talk about that later. First factor, the interest for this foreign culture that is perceived as threatening. That has led to a growing interest, and also for us and our publishing house, it might be a reason. We know when we publish a book that it might get a better response in the media, and that was Al Aswani, The Republic of Dreamers. That's a novel that dealt with the failed Arabic Revolution in 2011, and it got a better press. And it would be more difficult, much more difficult, to have an unknown author that we want to publish that doesn't deal with that political subject at all. In other words, with Hansa, our publishing house, we, in our literary program, definitely look for voices, authors that write a piece of literature and not only respond to political or historical events. It's indeed relatively difficult to get through with that, so to speak. So experience is really sobering us as you talk about getting to know a foreign culture. But then if you take a real look at what happens when you deal with a foreign culture, a foreign literature, depicting life very precisely in their places, then unfortunately there isn't that keen interest any longer. And it really stays in the area of specific events. Maybe we can come back to that later on with the preferences or the difficulties that the two of you described, what impact is created because of that. But I would like to go to the other side, the market in the Arabic countries. You are right, it's very different and diverse countries and languages and cultures. Russia, you are a publisher, and you act in a market that knows difficulties that we also know here in Germany. There is a declining interest in books. It's difficult to encourage people to read in the first place, but there are different problems. There is censorship. There is another difficulty that is selling the books, and there is the big problem of pirated copies, very widespread in the Arabic countries. And there are whole markets that broke down because of wars and armed conflicts in Syria, in Iraq, and what have you. You, as a publisher, how do you get along in that environment? Rasha lives in Beirut. Obviously, the internet connection is a bit difficult. I know that from my own experience. Probably her internet connection doesn't work. So we have to wait for her to come back. So let's go on now. So I just wanted to come back to what I've mentioned just now. Yasmina, what you said and what Mr. Salabè confirmed, this news-driven interest in literature. I ask myself, does it have an impact on writing as such? Authors in the Arabic world might know that. And you also know, if you want to be successful, if you want to become known, the Western countries are an important market for you. Would that influence their writing and the selection of subjects? Have you observed that?
It's a complicated question, the relationship between the two. Certainly, there is real demand for translation in Arabic countries. I don't think it's comparable in any other country. I think that young authors really, like, as soon as their book is out, they will look for someone for translation. And I don't think this happens. Like in other countries, I know, like young French authors, they're just so thrilled to be published by a French publisher. They look for French press, they look for French events. And if they get translated, it's bonus. But like for young Arab authors, certainly it's more of an existential thing. Like recognition really comes from abroad, not from the local market, let's say, for various reasons, I think. But so they will, I mean, I have seen a lot of, first novel author or not even unpublished, not published yet authors come to me with their manuscript. And I can see sometimes the way they write, they're trying to make themselves known. But I wouldn't say it's so much trying to, the way that, let's say, the wave of events is served is a bit more subtle. It's not necessarily like the news on a first level, but it could be, for example, at some point there was a lot of submissions coming to me that were more about like repression of women, topics that also are attractive differently, not just in the current events under the big headline of current events, but somehow linked to social repression in a way or another. When it comes to politics, well, it's a bit more complicated because writing about these topics is not that simple. If you're living in an Arab region, you might want to think twice if you want to tackle a topic like this or not. If you're living in a country where freedom of expression is not necessarily guaranteed, it's risky. And that's the reason why Samad Yazbek left Syria, in fact. And so, it's not that simple to write about these situations. But if you look at Egypt, for example, a lot of books came out about the revolution in Cairo, and it's not depicted necessarily under, let's say it's complex. It's not depicted only under a good light or a bad light, but they're not necessarily political books. They're more about what happens on the street. I think that generation of writers is still digesting this like unprecedented, social event that brought so many different people at one point in time with the same idea at one point in time. And then, of course, they were separated for different reasons. And so in Egypt, you do have a lot of books that come out on the revolution, but because they're not specifically political. So when it comes to politics, as I said, it's more complicated. So short answer, take home message. One, yes, we see authors trying to get translated and writing to attract a foreign audience, but they won't go towards politics to do that.
Sehen Sie das, was...
As Mr. Salabè pointed out, do you see that there is a trend or an attempt to write directly in a foreign language, like in English and French to begin with, in order to open up the market right at the beginning?
I think so. I mean, there certainly are writers who write in French or in English. French, for example, is very important in North Africa, where French is a very important language. It's also true of Lebanon, where you have people writing in French. English is a dominant language anyway, so like a lot of people who would pick up the pen and write in English. But I don't think that people would write in that language in order to be more heard. And in fact, there is a tendency to the contrary, like where people are trying to reclaim their language. It's true of Moroccan authors as well, where I know there's a strong tendency to want, for young authors to want to write in Arabic and reclaim that language in a way. So it's a bit more complicated, but doesn't deny the fact that some, beautiful authors write in French or English. But I don't think it's to be. I don't think that language is generally chosen to be heard.
Mhm. Herr Salabè, ich würde gerne noch mal.
Mr. Salabè, I would like to ask you again the question that I think that you have to ask as a publisher. Definitely you, as a publisher, have an interest to have literature translated and place it on the market, moving away from politics and political events that are in the headlines. But there is no real interest in that. How could you deal with that? What would you need to create attention and interest for authors? Nevertheless, readers wouldn't buy these books, but how could you deal with that? How could you stimulate demand for such books? That's an excellent question. I believe that it is indeed very important that once in a while a successful book in the book market creates interest for a certain region. From Latin America, we saw that when there was the big boom of the Latin American literature, thanks also to Garcia Marquez, 100 Years Loneliness. And maybe the Nobel Prize to Abdullah Zakurna is maybe a positive news, as the interest now is strengthened in countries. That was Africa rather, but still, also Arabic countries are located in Africa. Even if it's not an Arabic-speaking author, I do believe it shows effect so that people look more for that. And in media reporting, and that's central also, media reporting is so important. If there are no reviews, people don't learn that the book exists. So that's really important. And that example really gives me hope. And the worldwide net is important. That is also the link between Western Europe and the Arabic-speaking world. I think the networking here should become stronger, which is happening right now with our panel discussion and also with your agency, Yasmina, that really has brought interest of many, many Arabic writers. And then the experts, the translators, only against the background of very famous translation of Hama Boshal, we could have books translated without mediation and agency work of translators. We could not be successful. And there is a group of highly competent translators that really work in this direction. That's a central point. I don't speak Arabic, and I always have to rely on translators. Once we look at books and are in the decision-making process whether we publish that. Fendrich is a very well-known translator name. Labisa Bender is another very famous example. Stefan Weidner, also very important. He writes expert opinions, although he doesn't translate himself. So this agency role is extremely important. And we would welcome if also in the area of the reception, the review in the press or in the media in general, one could show more interest and become more visible, because this would lead to a situation that more books could be sold, and maybe publishers could become more courageous, deciding to publish an Arabic author. And also, it's difficult, as they always think it won't be successful. So there is a lot of work in the background, this filigree work that we always do before a book can be published, and that's so important. And I come from Italy myself. I know how important the network between publishing houses and experts is, so that books can be translated in the first place. That's highly important. If many books are translated, automatically there are more reviews about them, and the hope is also there that the interest that is there for culture of the Islam, because of the well-known reasons, so that this interest will widen into interest in life in those countries, and not only interest in thread and manners, but also maybe can be helpful for multicultural activities here in Germany. With respect to this point, and that was something that came across me some time ago, that's an important example which I would like to describe. And I thought it could be a positive example, but I can't say whether it really can become a positive one. I would like to ask Yasmina, because you represent this author, Aziz Mohammed from Saudi Arabia. He wrote a book in 2016. It was published in Saudi Arabia, and this year it was translated into French and published under Aksud. That could be an example, as Mr. Salabè just described it. What would you say? Yasmina, Saudi Arabian authors are translated very rarely. I can't think of any example recently here in Germany. But how did that author be translated? How was it that it was translated?
For speaking of Aziz Mohammed, because his book is precisely very unrelated with war or politics.
Exactly.
And so that's a brilliant example to introduce here. So Aziz Mohammed is, it's his first novel. He was shortlisted to the IPAF, which is the International Prize for Arabic Fiction that is awarded in Abu Dhabi once a year, and is developed in collaboration with the Man Booker, the International Man Booker. And this is how the book first was brought to my attention, because I was, of course, I monitored this prize just to get a sense of what's being noticed. And I was at the ceremony, so I heard him speak. And more than the topic of the book, it's him, actually, his personality, that I thought was very interesting. The book is about leukemia, which is very surprising, a topic very universal in a way. And it's a very sarcastic book, and that's a very, let's say, rare quality in Arabic literature. You have a lot of funny books in Egypt, for example, but sarcasm is rarer. And one of my other authors, Boudouahi, who unfortunately passed away this summer, also had this quality of sarcasm. And so this book, I thought, because of that difference, would attract attention, and it did. The people were interested. They were like surprised by the subtlety of the way he dealt with this topic, and the relationship, of course, to society, and how he lived through cancer with his family. Of course, you have the whole social criticism in the background, obviously. And so this book, I, of course, spoke about it to many people, and it was also translated by Hupo from the UC Press. But I'd like to say there's something in common between Aksud and Hupo on this one, is that they're both very connected to specialists. So Piero was mentioning earlier the importance of experts, and I can't agree with him more. I personally work a lot with translators as well. I always do my best to underscore the importance of their work and how underestimated it is in general by the public, or even in the industry by non-experts. So when it comes to this book, it went fast into French very simply because Farouk, the editor of Sinbad, the imprint within Actes Sud that does Arabic books, he does approximately 10 books of modern contemporary fiction a year. He reads Arabic, right? So he was very fast. He was intrigued. He knew it was shortlisted. He saw it on my list. He was curious. He read it and he loved it. And it did happen as well that in France, the consulate of Saudi Arabia supports translation from Saudi authors. It's a bit, they select the books they want to support. So it's not like, an institution where you can apply for a grant. And they knew me from previous collaborations with a classic of Saudi that belongs to Jraissati. And so they came to me and said, we want to support this book. and it would be great if Actes Sud would do it. And I say, well, it happens that they are interested and they're reading it. And so this also certainly helped. I think Farouk would have done it because he really loved it. And because, as you said, Saudi authors are underrepresented in literature. There aren't that many that really, grew. I have maybe one other author on my list from Saudi, and I used to work with another one. I still do, trying to find a home for his book. But there aren't that many Saudi authors. So it piques people's curiosity. It's different, and it tells them about the world within the Arab region, which is Saudi Arabia, that is even more opaque, even more, far away from them. And so whatever can give them insight is, of course, intriguing. So that novel is also now in the shortlist of the Institut du Monde Arabe Lagardère Award for Arabic Literature. So I'm very happy for a first novel and a first translation that he made it this far. So that's how it happened in this case.
Herr Salabè, die Frage würde ich gleich.
Mr. Salabè, I would like to ask that question now to you. You as a proofreader, would that be interested in such a book? How would you estimate the chances of such a title that was just described? I mean, you didn't read it, I assume, but after everything you've heard about it, how would you see the chances for such a book on the German market? I personally would be really interested. And we had these beautiful talks with Yasmina, always on the book fair, normally twice a year. This year we couldn't talk to each other at all, unfortunately. Of course, you need experts who look into such a book. You would have to find out how the writing style is, whether there was an author that really has this aesthetic project and an interesting way of writing. Definitely, that's important. And the second question is whether we are interested in that subject. Yes, of course, it depends very much on how it is written. And we are really much dependent on experts in that respect. Or we have the opportunity to see and read the text in English or French version. And if we had that and I could decide, then I would rather try to be absorbed by the text, the way it is written, and also background situation of the country, how it's described, so that there wouldn't be any reason why a story taking place in a certain country cannot be published in another country. Okay, you might develop the idea that you won't sell it well because the reality of the country is too complex. Once in a while, as a matter of fact, that is indeed a criterion when you take decisions. Al-Kati, that's an author from Oman, and she had a novel in English that I could read, and I thought about it for a long time. Do we really want to publish that novel, yes or no? I regarded it highly interesting. It was a family story, but the reality was highly complex also for me. And it was difficult for me to understand her, and the tone was rather silent. And such a book would have had difficulties in the market. I would say we should then hope to have very good reviews on it, but you have to take a look at the whole picture to take the right decision. There are always several criteria that are considered. The very way how your own cultural reality is described, that can be easygoing or not so easygoing. If it's simplified, which I don't like, you might think once in a while, then maybe readers can understand it better. If it's too complicated, that's the other opposite. Then the criterion should be that the literary value is very high, which you also have once in a while. Unfortunately, Russia didn't come back, so there was an internet problem, obviously, to Beirut. But therefore, I would like to discuss again with Yasmina about the other side, about publishing and selling books and writing in Arabic countries. I mentioned before, when I asked the question to Russia, that there are particular problems in that market. There is censorship, there are piracy copies, so it's really difficult, and some markets are difficult. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon as well, because in Lebanon there is a crisis right now that is unprecedented. And this hits the book industry in the Lebanon as well. If I understood it properly, it's really important for the Arabic region. How do you assess that situation with respect to Lebanon in particular? What does it mean for making books in the Arabic world that this country is doing so badly?
I'm sorry Rasha couldn't be with us,
Ja.
because I would have loved to hear her too. Jraissati is a very special house in the Lebanese and Arab landscape, so I would have loved to hear what she had to say. But I'll try to answer this question the best I can. The problems you describe, even before the Lebanese crisis, are in fact very critical. So censorship, yes, and censorship is a problem, especially if a publisher plans to publish a book, and Saudi Arabia is actually the largest market because it's a very large country with a good purchasing power. And so if the book is banned, that's all the plans falling through. Now, of course, Saudi Arabia is going through deep transformations towards openness. So, we can maybe hope for less censorship. But it's not just Saudi Arabia. It's also all sort of places. And sometimes you'd be surprised the book is in Saudi Arabia, but not, let's say, in another country, or created problems in another country, even like Lebanon. The topics are different, the sensitivity varies. And so once a publisher complained and said, I just wish we had rules. We just knew this would be censored and that's it. On one hand, I understand where he comes from. As a publisher, you want to plan, you can't go in that topics, you just don't. But then when it comes to self-censorship, it becomes more problematic, because then you'd be sure, if there were clear rules, that some topics would never be published. So in a way, it's good that these rules, let's say, are arbitrary, because at least it allows some books to see the light of day. Piracy is another very big problem, because I think it really hinders and prevents the Arabic book industry to really grow into a full-blown industry. Publishers complain a lot about losing a lot of money to piracy. A lot of them estimate the loss to 40%. I don't know where these numbers come from, but I hear it a lot. On one hand, the good news is it means that there are readers. I guess if they're pirating books, it means that they want to read, so that's good news. But somehow there's a misfit between the readers and the book. Either it's maybe too expensive, or maybe it's not available because you also have a distribution issue. So if you want a book and it's not there, what can you do? The shipping costs as much as the book. So a lot of people just resort to pirated copies on the internet, PDF version. And even today, if I'm looking for a review on a book, one of the first things that come up is just to download the PDF copy of the book pirated. So it's a real big problem that will affect the quality of the book at some point. I've spoken to a lot of publishers who would tell me, for example, it's complicated to invest so much money in publishing a book if you're going to lose so much money when you're coming to sell it. And I have a very interesting example on this topic. But when it comes to Lebanon in particular, I think what we're going through today is crazy. I have no other words to put it. I'm not there, and watching it from outside is terrifying. But of course, I am in touch with publishers, and I'm impressed at how much resilience they have shown. I don't like the word resilience, and a lot of Lebanese actually, spoke against it. Because people would applaud Lebanese resilience, but in fact it's not resilience. It's just that people are trying to survive. But I'm very I remember having conversations with Dar al Adab, for example, with whom I'm in regular contact, and she was very proud to be able to publish still, and she published throughout the pandemic as well. A lot of Lebanese publishers in Lebanon continue, but these are the larger ones, of course. I don't know how smaller ones can make it. Power cuts are arbitrary. You have to, fuel is not there. Even if you have how do you say, in Arabic you say electricity generator that is independent of the state, so something that you privately own or lend from, or pay to get extra electricity. They have problems getting fuel. So without electricity, without internet, without all of the system behind it, you can see how easily it breaks down. The cost of paper, of course, because paper is imported, and now we have a terrible inflation. It would be a tragedy, honestly, because Lebanon has been historically such a beating heart for publishing, because Lebanon is such a small market that publishers were basically drawn to publish books to address the whole Arab region. And this is a particularity of Beirut. Like publishing in Beirut is, they publish authors from all around the region, and they count on selling their books all around. That's not true of Egypt, for example, or where a lot of publishers will cater first to the Egyptian market because it's such a large country. They don't necessarily need to sell outside. If they're very small, they don't need to trouble themselves necessarily with distribution outside, etc. So it's impossible in Lebanon. You can't survive with just the Lebanese market. So that's an interesting characteristic of Lebanon, and I think that we really need to support in any way we can. If there are ways that the international publishers community can do something to support publishers in Lebanon, maybe we can sit down together and think of ways.
Jetzt muss ich noch mal schnell fragen. Kann ich
Let me ask, can we talk to Rasha? Can we just talk to her? Rasha, can you hear me? Rasha, can you hear me? Can you answer?
Hi, Rasha. Schön, Sie zu hören.
Hi, Rasha. Nice to hear you. We just hear your sound and don't see you. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time left, and we heard a few points already from Yasmina about the Arabic book market and its difficulties. But I would like to talk about your work briefly, how you get along in the present situation as a publisher. And that would be my first question. And the second question, how you see the chances of translations at the moment of a non-Arabic language into Arabic. What kind of books, what projects would you like to do next? What would you see should urgently be translated into Arabic?
Yes, as Yasmina said, we are in a survival mode, but living in Lebanon, lacking the very essentials like current and fuel doesn't mean that we're going to give up. So we are trying to survive, and we're more and more into electronic books. So we really do prefer to have prepaid books and to give them for gratis on our website, on even in PDF, because we feel that people really need to read, and to read widely, and reading is becoming so much expensive in war zones. So I suppose that we should make efforts, as you were saying, to support this very small industry that was shining and was trying to do its best to be present. And about translations, translation is very important for our part of the world. And we don't have titles in mind, but we would like also to send our books to the open world, if you mean. We would like to see more books translated into French, into English, and that's it. I don't know if the sound is correct.
Doch, der Sound ist sehr gut. Wir können Sie hören. Wir hören Sie gut.
Yes, we hear you excellently.
Dar al-Jadid ist ein Haus, das aus dem Deutschen auch und aus anderen Sprachen wichtige Bücher ins Arabische gebracht hat, von denen man sich ja fragt, wie sie da aufgenommen werden. Nietzsche, Paul Celan. Aber für die Zukunft, ich weiß, dass Sie Projekte haben und dass Sie große Pläne haben, noch mehr Bücher zu übersetzen. Welche könnten das sein? Was ist gerade jetzt besonders wichtig?
Rasha?
Still here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Haben Sie...
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
Once again, a last question about the translations. I know that you translated a lot as a publishing house. What other books could be translated into Arabic? What book is missing? What would you like to have translated into Arabic for Arabic readers?
A lot. Everything is missing, and we need to retranslate. I think that a lot of classics should be retranslated into Arabic. To begin with, Greek, the Hellenistic word that was much of an influence for the Arab word. Yani, to speak of the Iliad, l'Odyssée, l'Iliade, all those books should be retranslated. We need to retranslate Goethe, to retranslate all the classics, not only the moderns. So we have a lot to do, and I think we need more than one life to do it, and not only from German, but from German, from French, from English. So the translators have a lot to do, and I hope they will do, and will do with our small publishing house.
Okay. Vielen Dank für diese letzten.
Thank you very much for the last words. I would have loved to talk more with you and ask you further questions. Unfortunately, we have to come to an end. We were already too long, and I can hear from your statements that we are all very busy, have a lot of work to do. Also, you need to cooperate more, and I wish you all the best of success. And thank you very much for listening, and have a nice day.